Okay. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at the scripts. I made a couple changes, and so none of the functionality is really different, but I just added more in-depth comments. Since we don't have a ton of time to go over all of the different things that you can add in, I added a little bit of detail into the comments in the scripts. So if you want to try to add things that we haven't covered in class, you can follow the directions there. And obviously, if you run into issues, we can always debug it together. But the scripts are linked from here from week 8. And I also link them in the video recordings as well. So if you've already downloaded the scripts, you may want to download a new copy of them. So I'm going to download this new version, and then we'll look at one of them to kind of talk about how they're a little bit different. I also added a README to this GitHub page that kind of explains some of the syntax that I'm using in some of the descriptions. So that's there as well. So if you want to replace the old scripts, you can go to this link and go to the green code button and just download a zip file. And that will download to your downloads folder. So we can go to the downloads folder, and you should see something that looks like this. And if you double click on this on Mac, it'll just create a new folder. And on Windows, you have to click on the extract all button and then just extract to where it is. And what we want to do is replace our scripts folder with these new scripts. You can either rename the scripts folder to match the scripts folder in your project, and Godot will just overwrite it. Or you can go into the scripts folder and then just drag and drop all of these scripts into the scripts folder, and it'll replace all of them. If you've changed any of the scripts, then take a note of your changes, or maybe make a copy of the script with a different name, and then you can reintegrate them into the new version. Of course, you don't really have to do this if you don't want to get the new scripts. You can just leave the ones that you've got. So I'm just going to rename this folder scripts, and I'm going to throw it into the main project folder and replace. And that's going to update all my scripts, and I'll show you what the new scripts look like. If you have Godot open when you replace those files, it's going to say that a bunch of the files are new, and what do we want to do with them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say keep changes and overwrites. Or am I going to say that? No, I'm going to say discard changes and reload. So that's going to discard the version that Godot has in its memory, and it's going to reload the new files. So that's the default, and we want to go with the default. So I'm just going to click that. You might see some errors, just dismiss them. That's fine. And so now if you look in the scripts folder, you should see basically the same stuff. There's a new README, which wasn't there before, but everything else is the same. And so if you look at a script, so for example, we haven't had time to go over creating checkpoints, but you can create a checkpoint if you want. You can use a checkpoint script, and you can build a little scene like our collectible object or our obstacle, and you can create a checkpoint and use the script. And in the script now, if you look at the top in this like yellow area, this is just a big comment, and it describes what the script does. It describes how to set up the nodes for a scene with this script, and then it describes what signals need to be added and what animations you might need to include. So there's usually a bunch of steps that are involved with making sure that the script works correctly, and I've tried to describe those steps efficiently. Of course, if you run into any issues, we can go over it. But all of the scripts have a more sort of robust description in them now. So you can try to use those if you want, and we'll use those when we create our UI, because I have some examples of stuff, and so we can use that example to work on our UI. Okay, so that's the new scripts folder. You don't really need it, but it may be helpful if you want to add some other stuff. So I'm going to close all of these, and we're going to create a new scene for our UI. So what we're going to do now is create like a splash scene. So when the game first opens, we'll see just a graphic, and then we'll see a button to start the game. We'll see a button to look at some instructions for the game. That's not really necessary, but I just wanted to give an example of that. And then you could have a button to quit the game. And so we'll just have a really simple UI for that. So when we're in Godot, we're either working in 2D or 3D or in UI or user interface. And the UI is set up so that basically it doesn't use the same sort of rendering that the 2D scene does. And so if we put in a user interface, we can just have a scene that's just a user interface, or we can put a user interface into an existing scene and it'll sort of exist on top of it. Building a UI in Godot is a little goofy, but it actually works pretty well once you get to know the different nodes. It's sort of like if you guys have done CSS before, it kind of works like that, but it's very different. In CSS, you can define lots of rules for different elements on your page. In Godot, it basically uses nodes that have very specific rules. So it's a little bit different than CSS. In CSS, you could have like one div and you could assign a bunch of rules to it. In Godot, any single rule that you want to have, like if you want to center something, that has its own node most of the time. So the UI is a little tricky to get to know, but once you get to know it, it's relatively easy to use. So anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to create a new scene by hitting the plus button here. And then I'm going to choose the green user interface node. And this will be the sort of main node for any user interface scene. So I'm just going to click on that. And it's going to make a little control node here. And then what I'm going to do is I have a menu script. So I'm going to open up this menu script. And in here is an example. It's not the only way that you can create a menu, but it's an example of a node structure for a menu. And what I've done with this script is when you see a hashtag like that, that's referring to a script that should be added. And then in parentheses, there's other notes, like what the name of the node would be and things like that. So this is going to be our start menu. So I'm going to double click on this control node and rename it start menu. And I'm sort of going to toggle back and forth between the script view and the 2D view so that we can see, how the layout works. So with this first control node, we want to add the script menu.gd. So I'm going to click on that node and go to the inspector and scroll all the way down to the bottom where my script property is and click on the empty and load, and then go to scripts and I'll find my menu script. And so now that's connected here. You can see it added a couple of properties up here, a path to load the first level, or any level really, and then a path to load the instruction scene. So those are kind of the defaults. You can remove or add more depending on what you want there. But now that I've got that set up, let's go ahead and save this scene. So I'm just going to hit Command S and go to Scenes. And it's already created the name based on the node that I added, which is Start Menu. And so I'm just going to save that. Okay.
Wait, what did we do?
Which part?
What you just did just now.
I just saved the scene. Yeah. So I just saved Start Menu Scene inside of my Scenes folder, like that. Okay. So we're going to recreate this setup. There's, again, you don't have to do it this way, but this is just an example setup. So I'm going to go back to the 2D node and or the 2D view, and so we can see the layout sort of get built. But let's take a quick look at what we're adding. So you can see there's a bunch of center containers. So anything that you want to be centered needs to be in a center container. It doesn't have to be centered, but often that's a thing that you want. There are HBox containers and VBox containers. So these are going to set our elements to align either horizontally or vertically, which can be useful. Again, not necessary, but another thing that's useful with our layout. These guys should actually be indented in a little bit. I'll have to update that. But anyway, And then inside those containers, we have either graphics, like our title is inside of a texture rect node, and then our buttons are inside of texture button nodes. I've added a few images to the project. I'm not going to go over creating the images because we've already learned how to make the art. But let's take a look at those real quick just to see what they look like. So I'm going to go back to the Finder and go to my sprites. And so I've added some UI in here. So I have this one sprite called UI titles. And I've just got a few frames in here of the sort of a big title for the game, a big image of the instructions, a big you win image, a big game over image. These are just like little defaults. You could really, obviously design these however you want. And then I've got some buttons which have different states. So the generic button has like a blank state, and then an active state, and then a hover state. And then I have like a start button that has the same states, and a quit button. It looks like I don't have an instructions button, so we'll have to just use a generic button for that. So you can create the graphics that way. There are like default button designs in Godot, but they're pretty bad looking, so I wouldn't really recommend using those. All right, so let's start setting up our menu. So what we want, so there's a few extra things that get added in Godot when we're designing the UI. They're over here, and they're green, which is nice because it makes it clear that they're related to the UI. So one is this alignment thing where we can align elements in different ways. Then there's also this drop down, which is the anchor preset, where you can set something to be anchored like to a corner, or you can set it to fill up a row or a column, or you can just set it up to fill the whole thing. So for our main menu, we'll just set it up to fill the entire rectangle. And what I'm going to do is just throw a bunch of elements in here, and then we will use some nodes to organize them. So in my start menu, I want like a little title with the name of the game, and you could also add other graphics. You could throw sprites in here. You can throw anything that you want in here, really. But if I want a graphic in the UI, if we look under this green section of our UI, you can see the different types of stuff in here. A lot of it is like layout stuff. And then some of it is graphics, like our texture rect we can use for graphics, or we can use a video. So there's a few different things in here. So what I want to use for my title is a texture rect. This is just a big rectangle that holds an image. So I'm going to throw this in here. I'll call this title. And I just have to choose the image I want. So I'm going to go over to texture and go to load and go to sprites. And then I have all of my UI titles together, so I'm going to have to use the layout to break them up. So you can see the cat game there. That looks good, but I don't want all of the rest of these. So to change that, I can actually click on this texture, and that's going to bring up this menu here. Or wait, actually kind of, let's see. Where is the okay, we have to remember how to tile this, or how to get just the sprite. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. Might have to look this up. Let's see. No. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to Google it real quick because I can't remember. Okay, Godot, texture, rect, divide, sprite, sheet. Okay, so we need to use an atlas texture. So you might want to just export your sprites as individual images, but we can use an atlas texture here, and this will give us the ability to divide this up, hopefully. Okay. Oh yeah, so we have to set the region. Okay. So I think my UI is 512 by 512. So let's see if we can set that 512 by 512. Okay, there we go. So that wasn't so bad, but you might want to just export your images as separate frames if you don't want to have to deal with that. So we can set an atlas texture, and then we can set the region that we want to display, and then it'll show just the part of the texture that we need. Okay, let's keep going. So now we need some buttons. So I'm gonna click on my start menu again, and I'm gonna add a button. There's a few different options for buttons. So we have like the default button with the Godot graphics. You have a check button. There's a bunch of different ones. What I'm gonna use is the texture button. This is what you wanna use if you made your own textures. And this is gonna have different textures for different states. So if we look under the textures here, you can see there's normal, pressed, hover, disabled, focused, and click mask. We're just gonna use the first three. That's all we really need for this demo. So I'm gonna click on here and go to load, and I'll go to sprites, and then I put my buttons in a separate folder just to keep them organized. So in here I have UI buttons, and I'm gonna start with my start button. So here's start, and I'm just gonna add each of my different designs for the start button. You don't have to do this. You could just have one image, but then the button won't react when you move the mouse or anything, so it may not be very clear that you can interact with it. So now we can see the start button here. It's kind of small. It's up here. But notice that it's just kind of stuck in the top left corner, just like our title, because we haven't done anything to actually organize this content yet. So that's when our layout nodes are going to come in handy. So I'm going to rename this start button, and then I'm just going to make another button. So I'll click plus and get a texture button, and I'll call this instructions button. I don't have an instructions button, so I'm just going to use a default, and I'll just update this later. So I'm just going to use an empty button. So I'm filling in normal, pressed, and hover. So we'll be able to see the button change as I interact. So I have my instructions button, and I'm going to make one more button, or texture button, which is my quit button, to quit the game. This should not be a child of the instructions button, so I'm just going to drag this up here to make sure it's a child of the start menu. Okay, so for my quit button, I have some textures. So I'm going to load sprites, UI, and then quit. And I have 3 separate textures for quit. Okay. So now I've got my 3 buttons, but notice also that my buttons are all covering each other. And if I move this, I can move these around, but that's not going to be a good way to make a layout. So let's add some layout nodes so that we can start to kind of design our scene a little bit better. So one node that is very useful is our sort of box container node. So if I type in box, you can see we have 2 types of box containers. One is an HBox container. That's going to align things horizontally. And the other is a VBox container. So let's start with a VBox container. And what I'll do is I'll just put my buttons in here. So I'm going to take all of my buttons and then drop them into the VBox container. So notice what that does. It aligns them nicely on top of each other. So I can change the order of the buttons, but the VBox container is going to determine how they're laid out. So that was very easy. We can just throw stuff into a VBox container, and now we have this nice vertical alignment. Another thing that we can use is an HBox container. So if I do the same thing and grab an HBox container, I could throw my title in here and then throw my VBox container in here. And now I get a nice little horizontal alignment of these two elements. So the title and the VBox container are the two elements that are being horizontally aligned. So these nodes apply to not just images, but also different node structures. Okay, so now these guys are kind of like stuck over here. You may be like, okay, that's fine, I'm done, but I kind of want to center them. So I'm gonna use a center container. So I'll click on the start menu and add a center container. And if I put this whole HBox in here, and then I make sure that the center container takes up the whole page by using the anchor preset over here, now all of my content is centered. Although these buttons are still up here. So if we want to center our buttons in our VBox container, we need to add another center container. So let's do that. I'm going to click on the VBox container. I'm going to add another center container. And then I'm going to put my buttons in there. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to put my VBox container inside of a center container. That's what I want to do. Okay, other way around. So my center container is going to center this VBox container in this area. Okay, so now I have a nice little layout where I have a title, and then I have some nice, centered buttons to press. So that's all the layout stuff I'm going to do. There's obviously a lot more you could do with this. I could spend, a really long time going over all the different layout nodes and all the different properties on all the layout nodes. But my advice is to keep it simple. If it doesn't look exactly like what you want it to, as long as it looks decent, I would just leave it. And, one day you'll be able to figure it out. But I wouldn't spend hours and hours getting your layout on the UI perfect, because it's not going to be super, super easy. Okay, let's now just set up our script, and then we'll be done with this part. So if we click on the main node, you can see that there are a couple variables related to our menu. One is the load level path. This is the level that we want to load when we start the game. So we can just throw the main level in here, or level 1. So if we click on this file browser here, just go to scenes and put in level 1. If you have a different level that you want to load, that's fine, but this is where we put that level. The next thing is the instructions path. I haven't actually created the instructions scene yet, and that's because my instructions scene is basically just a copy of this scene. And so I'm going to just duplicate this scene and then change the graphic to the instructions. And so I don't have that yet, but I'm going to do that now and then add it in there. But before I do that, I have a few other things that I want to set up that I don't want to have to do twice. So I'm going to do I'm going to do all the setup that I need to do before I duplicate the scene, so I don't have to repeat it. So we'll leave that for now. Okay, let's look at our script again. So we recreated this structure, this node setup, and now we've got a few signals to add, and then we have an optional sound that we can add. So we need to connect all of our buttons to the functions in the script to make them work. And so each button has a pressed signal, and so we just need to connect that signal to the matching function in the script. So if I click on the start button and I go to the node area over here and go to the pressed signal, I'll just click connect, and then we want to connect to the first node, and then just use the pick button to make sure that we're connecting to the right button. So we want to connect to on start button pressed. If you connect to the wrong button, it's going to just make up some code and it's not going to work. That's not the end of the world, but it won't work the way that it's intended to. So you may have to just reconnect it. So I'm going to click OK and click connect. And you should see a little green arrow appear next to some already existing code. If you see some new code get created, then that means it's not connected in the right place. Okay, that was our start button. Let's go to our instructions button. And we're going to do the same thing. Just pick the instructions button here and click connect.
When I press pick, the stuff is not showing up.
Is the script connected to the main node?
Yeah.
So if I click on the quit button and I double click pressed, do you see this menu? And when you click pick, wait, first of all, is the start menu node selected?
Oh no.
Okay, so you may not have the script connected to the
Am
right
I
node.
supposed to like click it, select this, and then press pick?
Yeah. Yes. There you go. Yeah. So make sure you have the node with the script selected at the top, and then when you press click, you'll see the right button. Just hit OK, and hit connect. Okay. There's an option for a sound. So if you want a sound to play when you hover over a button, you can add that in. The code is commented out so that you won't get an error. But I'll demonstrate how to set that up in case you want to do that. So in the main node, we're going to add a audio stream player. We're just going to do a regular audio stream player. We don't need it to be positional. And this audio stream player needs to be called hover sound. So I'm going to call this hover sound. You can also put background music in this scene if you want some background music for your menu. It's not necessary, but it might be a nice thing to add. But we've already talked about that, so I'm going to ignore that for now. So we have our hover sound. I don't actually have a sound for this, so I'm just going to throw in something random. I'll throw in this hit sound. Or no, I'll throw in the Apple sound. That'll probably be more funny. And that's all we're going to do there. We don't need to do anything else. But we do need to connect our button mouse entered to the on mouse entered function, which is commented out. So if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see this function on mouse entered. Just remove that comment. And same thing with the hover sound.play. And so now if we connect that signal to our buttons, it'll play that sound when we hover over them. So if we go to start button and go to node and then go to mouse entered down here, and then we're going to connect this, we're going to click pick and connect it to on mouse entered. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other two buttons. So mouse entered and pick and on mouse entered. And then quit button, mouse entered, pick, on mouse entered, and we're going to click connect. Okay, so we've added these guys and we're all connected. So let's test this real quick and then we're going to duplicate this for our instructions menu. So I'm going to say run this menu. Okay, our sounds work. That's good. So if I quit, it should quit the game. And that seems to work. And if I click start, it should start level 1. And that also seems to work, so that's nice. So then we just need to make a bunch of copies of this because we're going to use it for our in-game menu as well. So let's close the output. Let's open our file system and go to scenes. And this start menu, I'm just going to make a few copies and then just change a couple things to make different menus. So I'm going to right click on this and click duplicate. And I'll call this instructions. So there's my instruction scene. And then I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to make a game over menu. And I'm going to do the same thing. And make a game or win game 1. Game over and game 1. Okay. So now if I go to my instructions menu, the advantage of doing this is that all of my signals are connected. My script is there. I don't have to change anything other than the graphics that are being displayed. So I have my instructions menu open. I'm going to change the name of the main node. I'm just going to change that to instructions. And then I've got this graphic that says cat game in the middle. I'm just going to go to that title, and since I have it on the same sprite, you can throw another sprite in here, or another image, but I can actually just edit this atlas. So I'm just going to move the atlas down. So if I change the Y value to 512, that's going to move down to the next image in my sprite sheet. That only works if you kind of like have the right number. If I put like 500 here, it actually looks fine, but if I put like 200, it's going to be like halfway. So you have to make sure you know the size of your sprite frames. But now I've got my instruction scene. Everything else works exactly the same. You may want to take out the instructions button since we're already on the instructions scene. That would be fine. We can just delete this. But everything else is going to stay the same. Okay. Next, let's go to our... actually, let's go back to the start menu. And now that we have the instruction scene, let's add that to our instructions path. So we'll just go to scenes and go to instructions. Another thing that is nice with our UI, let's say I have kind of like boring colors. I just have like white and gray. But if I want to change the color in different levels, I can go down to this visibility property here, and I can modulate the color using that property. So I can create different colors of my UI for different scenes, and then I can apply that to all of the UI. So I can save this color, it's this hex value here, and then I can go to modulate my VBox container, and I can paste that in there, and that'll modulate all of the buttons because they're all inside of the VBox container. So that's a nice, this visibility feature allows you to do a lot of stuff that's kind of cool with the colors and stuff. So now I've got a little green menu here, but my instructions menu is still going to be the same color. Okay. So I've set that up. Now we just have game one and game over. And actually, you know, since I want instructions on those too, let's just delete those and just duplicate the new start menu that has the instructions path already set up. So I'm going to duplicate it again and call this game one menu. So then if I open up the game over menu, I'll go to my title and go to my texture atlas, and this is going to be 512 plus 512. Actually, that's you win, so let's add another 512. Okay, so we've got game over. Let's make this red, since green doesn't really make sense here. Although, of course, you can make the original graphics whatever color you want. You don't have to do it this way. And then let's rename this node game over menu, so we don't forget what that is. And then we have the game one menu. So we'll rename this game one menu. And we'll go to our graphic. And this one is at 512 plus 512. Oh, whoops. Oh, I was editing the wrong Y. Godot has like a million properties for everything, so just be careful what you're editing. Okay. So we've got all this stuff set up. And so now, if we want to actually use it, we need to set our start menu as the first level that gets loaded, or scene that gets loaded. So the last thing we need to do is go to project settings and go to run, I think, or yeah. So we go to run, and this property main scene, if you've been using the build button to play your scene or to preview the scene, this main button here, then you may have already set your current level to the main scene. That's what happens when you run the build button. It's going to play the main scene no matter where you are in the game, in the editor. So if you've done that, that's not the end of the world. You just need to replace it. So if we go back to project settings, you'll see now my level 1 is the main scene because I used that little button to set it. So we just need to reset this And we just need to go into scenes and choose our start menu. And now when you build the game, this is what's going to show up. And when we export the game later in class, it's the first level that we're going to see. So now if I hit the build button, even though I currently have open my level 1, when I hit build, it's going to start the main scene. So we can start the game and da-da-da. And then right now, if I fall through the bottom of the level, nothing happens. And what you can do is trigger that game over scene, but it's going to depend on the circumstances of your game. So you may have different reasons why you might have a game over. So if you want to set that up, we can do that sort of, individually. For now, I'm just going to leave that out, just because there's lots of different circumstances that may lead there. But if you don't have a game over, that's fine. We don't have a ton of time to work on the games. I'd rather have, a nice long level and different stuff going on in the scene rather than like all the UI be finished. But there are some different options for setting up the UI if you want to do that. All right, so that's it. We're going to export the game during the second part of class. That process is a lot easier, so we'll have more workshop time later in class. For now, we'll do some workshop time to work on this UI, or if you want to work on other components of the game, that is fine as well. So I'll stop here.